In a quiet suburban neighborhood where rows of neatly trimmed lawns and white picket fences lined the streets, John Harper lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. To his neighbors, he was just another hard-working man in his mid-40s, content with his simple existence. He worked long hours at the local hardware store, greeted people with polite nods, and spent his weekends coaching his daughter Emily's soccer team. But beneath this unassuming exterior lay a past so buried that even those closest to him had no idea it existed. John Harper was once one of the most feared operatives in the CIA, a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of criminals worldwide. However, after losing his wife in a tragic car accident years ago, he left it all behind, choosing to live a life of anonymity for the sake of his young daughter. Emily Harper, now 14, was the light of John's life. She was everything her mother would have wanted her to be: bright, spirited, and full of dreams. A straight-A student, Emily loved playing soccer, reading books, and spending time with her friends. Her world revolved around school, sports, and social media. Like any other teenager her age, she adored her father deeply but often wondered why he seemed so distant at times. There were moments when she caught him staring out the window, lost in thought, or sitting alone in the garage late at night, tinkering with tools as if trying to escape something. But whenever she asked him about it, he simply smiled and brushed it off, saying he was just tired from work. Emily never pressed further. She trusted her dad completely and believed he would tell her anything important when the time was right. What neither Emily nor anyone else knew was that John's ordinary life was built on layers of secrets. Before moving to the suburbs, he had spent over 2 decades working for the CIA, specializing in dismantling organized crime syndicates across the globe. His missions were legendary: stealthy infiltrations, high-stakes negotiations, and brutal confrontations that left even hardened agents in awe. Yet every victory came at a cost. The constant danger, sleepless nights, and moral compromises weighed heavily on him. When his wife died in a hit-and-run accident, one that he suspected was linked to his work, he made the difficult decision to leave the agency. He moved to a small town, changed his name, and vowed to protect Emily from the violent world he once inhabited. For years, he succeeded in keeping his old life hidden, blending seamlessly into the fabric of suburbia. Despite his efforts to stay under the radar, trouble had a way of finding John. One evening, while helping Emily with her math homework at the kitchen table, he noticed something odd. She kept glancing at her phone nervously, typing quickly and then shoving it back into her pocket. At first, he dismissed it as typical teenage behavior, perhaps a crush or drama with friends. But as days passed, he observed more changes in her demeanor. Emily, who used to laugh freely and bounce around the house, became quieter and more withdrawn. She stopped eating properly, avoided conversations, and spent hours locked in her room. Concerned, John tried talking to her, asking if everything was okay at school or if someone was bothering her. Each time she shook her head and said nothing was wrong, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. One weekend, while doing laundry, John stumbled upon Emily's phone lying forgotten on the couch. Normally, he respected her privacy, but something deep inside urged him to check it. What he found chilled him to the bone. Dozens of threatening messages filled her inbox, sent by someone claiming to be part of a local gang. The sender, who called himself Alex, demanded money, threatening to harm Emily and her family if they didn't comply. According to the messages, Alex believed John was wealthy because of his calm demeanor and nice house, though in reality, John barely scraped by on his modest salary. The gang had been terrorizing Emily for weeks, preying on her fear and isolation. She hadn't told anyone, not her teachers, not her friends, and certainly not her father, because she didn't want to burden him or put him in danger. As John read through the messages, his heart sank. Anger surged through him, but it was tempered by a profound sense of guilt. How could he have missed this? How could he, a man trained to detect threats from miles away, fail to notice that his own daughter was being tormented? He sat there for a long time, gripping the phone tightly, memories of his past flooding back. Images of dangerous missions, ruthless enemies, and lives lost flashed before his eyes. He had sworn to leave that life behind, to shield Emily from the horrors he had faced. And yet here she was, caught in the crosshairs of violence once again. Determination replaced despair as he realized what he needed to do. No matter how hard he tried to run from his past, it always found a way to catch up. This time, however, he wouldn't let it destroy his family. He would use every skill he possessed to protect Emily no matter the cost. That night, after putting Emily to bed, John sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring at the wall. His mind raced with plans and possibilities. He knew he couldn't go to the police, not yet. They might scare off the gang, leaving them free to retaliate later. Besides, he doubted they'd understand the gravity of the situation without solid evidence. No, this was something he had to handle himself, at least for now. Reaching into the attic, he retrieved an old duffel bag he hadn't touched in years. Inside were tools of the trade he thought he'd left behind, encrypted communication devices, surveillance equipment, and a few personal mementos from his days in the field. As he unpacked the items, a wave of nostalgia mixed with dread washed over him. He wasn't the same man he used to be, but the instincts and skills remained sharp. For Emily's sake, he would become that man again, even if it meant facing the darkness he had sworn to escape. Over the next few days, John began gathering information about the gang. Using his knowledge of online platforms and digital footprints, he traced Alex's IP address to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. From there, he started piecing together the gang's structure, identifying key members and their roles. During the day, he maintained his routine, smiling at coworkers and cheering Emily on during soccer practice. But at night, he transformed into a shadowy figure, prowling the streets and observing the gang's activities from afar. He noted their patterns, their weaknesses, and their vulnerabilities. Every detail mattered. Every clue brought him closer to ensuring Emily's safety. Though the weight of his actions gnawed at him, he reminded himself of one thing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting the person who meant the most to him. As John delved deeper into the gang's operations, he realized just how dangerous they were. This wasn't some small-time group of petty criminals. They were well-organized, ruthless, and connected to larger criminal networks. Their leader, a man known only as Rico, was feared across the city for his violent tendencies and cunning strategies. Rico had built an empire out of fear, extortion, and intimidation, preying on vulnerable people like Emily to expand his influence. The more John learned about them, the clearer it became that confronting them directly would be suicide. He needed a plan, a smart, calculated approach that played to his strengths while minimizing risk to Emily. John began by mapping out their movements. Each night, under the cover of darkness, he donned nondescript clothing and ventured into the seedier parts of town where the gang operated. Armed with binoculars, a notebook, and years of experience, he observed their routines meticulously. They frequented a dilapidated warehouse near the industrial district, using it as both a hideout and storage facility for weapons, drugs, and stolen goods. John noted the number of guards stationed outside, their patrol schedules, and even subtle details like which entrances they used most often. Every piece of information brought him closer to dismantling them, but also reminded him of the stakes. One wrong move could put Emily in even greater danger. During the day, John struggled to maintain his facade of normalcy. At work, he forced himself to smile and engage in small talk with coworkers, all while replaying surveillance footage in his mind. On weekends, he coached Emily's soccer team, cheering her on from the sidelines despite the turmoil brewing inside him. Emily, sensing something was off but unable to pinpoint what, grew increasingly worried about her father. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the way he seemed distracted during meals, and the late nights when she heard faint noises coming from the garage. When she asked if everything was okay, he simply hugged her tightly and said, "I'm fine, sweetheart, don't worry about me." But deep down, Emily knew something was weighing heavily on him. One evening, as John scrolled through old contacts on an encrypted phone retrieved from his duffel bag, he paused at a name. Sarah Collins. Agent Sarah Collins had been one of his closest allies during his CIA days, a sharp, resourceful woman who shared his commitment to justice. Though they hadn't spoken in years, John trusted her implicitly. After hesitating for a moment, he sent her a secure message, explaining the situation without revealing too much. Within hours, she responded, agreeing to meet him discreetly at a remote diner outside town. The reunion was bittersweet. Sarah looked older than he remembered, her once vibrant energy tempered by years of dealing with bureaucracy and red tape. Still, her determination shone through as she listened intently to John's story. He recounted everything: the threats against Emily, the gang's activities, and his own observations. Sarah didn't judge or question his motives. Instead, she offered practical advice. "You can't take them down alone, John," she said firmly. "These guys are dangerous and you're not exactly equipped for this anymore. Let me help you." Together, they devised a two-pronged strategy. First, Sarah would gather intelligence from law enforcement databases, identifying any ongoing investigations into Rico's gang, and gathering evidence that could bolster their case. Meanwhile, John would continue his surveillance, focusing on finding leverage, something so incriminating that it could cripple the gang permanently. Sarah warned him repeatedly to tread carefully. "If they find out you're onto them, they'll come after you, and Emily," she cautioned. John nodded grimly, knowing full well the risks involved. Despite the mounting pressure, John found solace in small moments with Emily. Even though she remained unaware of the true extent of the danger she was in, her presence grounded him. On a particularly tense evening, after returning home from another late-night stakeout, he found her curled up on the couch reading a book. Seeing her there, safe and sound, filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. He joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they chatted about school and her dreams of becoming a writer someday. For those fleeting minutes, the weight of his mission lifted, and he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could get through this together. But reality always came crashing back. A few days later, while tailing one of the gang members, John witnessed something that chilled him to the bone. The man entered a convenience store, pulled out a gun, and demanded cash from the terrified clerk. When the clerk hesitated, the thug smashed him across the face with the weapon before fleeing with the money. John clenched his fists as he watched the scene unfold from a distance, fury bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to intervene, to stop the cycle of violence right then and there. But he knew better. Acting impulsively would only jeopardize Emily's safety. Instead, he documented the incident, capturing photos and videos to add to the growing dossier of evidence against the gang. Back at home, John spent hours poring over maps and notes, refining his plan. He knew the warehouse was the key. It housed enough illegal contraband to send the entire gang to prison for decades. However, infiltrating it wouldn't be easy. It was heavily guarded, with cameras monitoring every angle. John decided to rely on misdirection. Using his knowledge of security systems, he crafted a device capable of temporarily disabling the cameras. With Sarah's help, he coordinated the timing of the operation to coincide with a major shipment delivery, ensuring maximum chaos when the authorities arrived. As the days passed, John felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Anticipation because he was finally taking action, fighting back against the monsters threatening his daughter. Dread because failure wasn't an option, not when Emily's life hung in the balance. Each step forward required immense focus and discipline, qualities he hadn't exercised in years. Yet with every challenge he faced, he drew strength from the memory of his wife and the promise he'd made to protect their child. No matter how daunting the task ahead, he vowed to see it through, for Emily's sake. On the eve of the planned operation, John sat alone in the garage, staring at the tools laid out before him. His heart raced as scenarios played out in his mind. What if something went wrong? What if Rico somehow figured out who he was? Shaking off the doubts, he reminded himself why he was doing this. Emily deserved a life free from fear, a chance to grow up surrounded by love and safety. That thought alone steadied his resolve. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would face it head-on. Because for John Harper, there was no greater motivation than the love he had for his daughter. The night of the operation arrived, cloaked in a heavy blanket of clouds that obscured the moon. John Harper stood in the shadows near the industrial district, his breath visible in the cold air. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now as he watched the gang's hideout from a safe distance, his mind raced with final checks. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal walls illuminated faintly by flickering streetlights. Guards patrolled the perimeter lazily, their movements predictable thanks to John's meticulous surveillance. Inside, Rico's men were likely busy unloading the latest shipment of weapons and drugs, a distraction John intended to exploit fully. Earlier that evening, John had given Emily strict instructions to stay at a friend's house overnight, citing a supposed work emergency. Though reluctant, she agreed, unaware of the real reason behind her father's request. As she left, John hugged her tightly, holding on longer than usual. "Be careful, okay?" Emily had said softly, sensing the tension in his voice. He nodded, forcing a smile before watching her walk away. Once she was safely out of sight, John returned home to gear up. Dressed in dark clothing and armed with tools from his duffel bag, he transformed into the operative he once was. His hands moved with practiced precision as he checked his equipment. Gloves, lock-picking tools, a small EMP device to disable cameras, and a burner phone for communication with Sarah Collins. Sarah had positioned herself nearby, coordinating, with local law enforcement to ensure backup would arrive at the right moment. Over the encrypted line, she whispered updates to John. "SWAT teams are en route but will hold back until your signal," she said calmly. "You've got 20 minutes max before they move in." John acknowledged her message with a grunt, his focus entirely on the task ahead. Timing was everything. If he disabled the cameras too early or triggered alarms accidentally, the entire operation could unravel. But if he succeeded, the gang wouldn't know what hit them until it was too late. Slipping through the darkness like a ghost, John approached the warehouse from the rear, avoiding the main entrances where guards lingered. Years of training kicked in as he navigated the terrain silently, every step deliberate and calculated. Reaching the first security camera perched high on a pole, he activated the EMP device. A soft hum filled the air as the camera's red light blinked off. Moving swiftly, he repeated the process with 2 more cameras along his path, creating a blind spot that allowed him access to a side door. With nimble fingers, he picked the lock within seconds and slipped inside. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, the faint glow of overhead bulbs casting long shadows across stacks of crates and machinery. John crouched low, scanning the area for signs of movement. Voices echoed from deeper inside, accompanied by the clinking of metal and the occasional laugh. Rico's men were distracted, focused on the shipment rather than potential intruders. Staying close to the walls, John crept forward, his heart pounding but his mind razor-sharp. Each step brought him closer to his goal, evidence that would bring the gang down for good. Reaching a cluster of wooden crates marked with foreign symbols, John paused. These were the weapons, the ones destined for sale on the black market. He quickly snapped photos with his phone, capturing serial numbers and identifying marks. Then, using a pocket-sized GPS tracker, he planted devices on several crates, ensuring law enforcement could trace their destinations later. Just as he finished, a shout startled him. One of the gang members had spotted something amiss and was calling out to the others. Panic rippled through the group as they scrambled to investigate. John cursed under his breath but didn't panic. Instead, he retreated toward the exit, retracing his steps carefully. As he reached the doorway, he pressed a button on his burner phone, sending a prearranged signal to Sarah. Within moments, the sound of distant sirens pierced the night. The gang erupted into chaos, shouting orders and grabbing weapons. Some ran toward the noise, while others barricaded themselves inside the warehouse. John seized the opportunity to slip outside unnoticed, melting back into the shadows. From a safe vantage point, he watched as police cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. Their flashing lights cutting through the darkness, SWAT teams stormed the building, overwhelming the gang members who were caught off guard. Gunfire erupted briefly before the authorities gained control, dragging handcuffed suspects out one by one. Among them was Alex, the same boy who had terrorized Emily online. John felt a surge of satisfaction seeing him led away in cuffs, his cocky demeanor replaced by fear. For a brief moment, John considered stepping forward to confront him, to show him the face of the man whose family he had dared to threaten. But he resisted the urge, knowing that justice would be served without his interference. As the scene unfolded, John's phone buzzed quietly. It was Sarah. "Mission accomplished," she said, her tone laced with relief. "They're all in custody. You did good, John." He exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the past few weeks begin to lift. Yet, even as he celebrated the victory, his thoughts turned to Emily. She was safe now, but she still didn't know the full extent of what he had done or who he truly was. That revelation would have to wait until the dust settled. The next morning, John woke up exhausted but lighter, as though a storm cloud had finally passed. News of the raid dominated headlines, with reporters praising the swift action of law enforcement. Neighbors congratulated him on the arrest, unaware of his role in the operation. Emily returned home, cheerful and oblivious to the danger she had narrowly escaped. Over breakfast, she chattered about her sleepover, recounting stories of movies and midnight snacks. John listened intently, savoring the sound of her laughter. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax, if only for a little while. Later that afternoon, as Emily sat in her room studying, John found himself standing in the garage again, staring at the duffel bag tucked away in the corner. The tools of his old life lay dormant, relics of a chapter he had hoped to leave behind forever. Yet, as much as he wanted to believe he could bury that part of himself, he knew better. The skills, instincts, and memories would always be a part of him, ready to resurface when needed most. And while he hated the idea of ever returning to that world, he couldn't deny the sense of pride he felt in using those abilities to protect his daughter. That evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "Dad," she murmured, her voice sleepy, "I'm really glad you're here." Her words caught him off guard, filling him with an overwhelming mix of love and guilt. He kissed the top of her head gently, promising himself that no matter what happened in the future, he would do everything in his power to keep her safe. Because for John Harper, there was nothing more important than the bond he shared with his daughter, and nothing he wouldn't sacrifice to preserve it. Though the immediate threat was gone, John couldn't shake the feeling that his past might not stay buried forever. Somewhere out there, remnants of his former life lingered, waiting to catch up with him. But for now, he chose to focus on the present, cherishing the quiet moments with Emily and rebuilding the life they had fought so hard to protect. Little did he know, however, that this victory was just the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test his resolve in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The days following the raid brought a strange mix of relief and unease for John Harper. On the surface, life seemed to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an ordeal. The gang was dismantled, its leaders arrested, and Emily no longer received threatening messages from Alex or anyone else associated with them. News reports hailed the operation as a major victory against organized crime, crediting law enforcement for their swift and decisive action. Neighbors congratulated John on the outcome, unaware that he had played a pivotal role in bringing the gang down. Yet beneath the calm exterior, John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Emily, too, noticed subtle changes in her father's behavior. Though she appeared cheerful and carefree, resuming her usual routines of school, soccer practice, and hanging out with friends, she remained perceptive enough to sense that something lingered beneath the surface. Her dad smiled more often now, but there were moments when his gaze grew distant, as if lost in thought. Sometimes, late at night, she heard faint noises coming from the garage, the same sounds she had noticed weeks earlier during the height of the gang's threats. When she asked him about it, he brushed it off with vague explanations like just fixing things or organizing old stuff. But deep down, Emily knew better. Something significant had happened, something her father wasn't ready to share. For John, Keeping secrets from Emily weighed heavily on his conscience. He had always prided himself on being honest with her, shielding her from harm while fostering trust through open communication. Yet, how could he explain the truth without shattering the fragile peace they had worked so hard to rebuild? How could he tell her that her quiet, unassuming father was once one of the most feared operatives in the CIA? That the skills he used to dismantle the gang weren't just remnants of a distant past, but tools honed over decades of dangerous missions? These questions haunted him, gnawing at his resolve every time he looked into Emily's trusting eyes. One evening, as they sat together in the living room watching TV, Emily turned to him suddenly. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "do you ever feel like, I don't know, like you're hiding something?" Her question caught him off guard, and for a moment he froze, unsure how to respond. Then, forcing a smile, he replied, "Of course not, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" She shrugged, looking away. "I don't know. It's just, sometimes you seem different. Like there's this whole other side of you I don't really understand." Her words struck a chord, stirring emotions he had buried long ago. Instead of answering directly, he pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering, "You'll always be my #1 priority, Em. No matter what happens, remember that." Despite his reassurances, Emily's curiosity only grew stronger. Over the next few days, she began piecing together fragments of information she had overlooked before. She remembered the cryptic messages on her phone, the sudden change in her father's demeanor, and the mysterious trips he took under the cover of darkness. At first, she dismissed these details as coincidences, attributing them to stress or overthinking. But then, while helping clean out the attic one afternoon, she stumbled upon something that made her pause. An old photo tucked inside a dusty shoebox. In the picture, a much younger John stood alongside several other men dressed in tactical gear, their faces grim yet determined. Beneath the image, scrawled in faded ink, were the words, "CIA Task Force, Operation Nightfall." Her heart raced as she stared at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This wasn't the man she knew. The kind, gentle father who coached her soccer team and fixed leaky faucets around the house. This was someone entirely different, someone capable of navigating danger zones and taking down criminals. For a moment, anger flared within her, not because he had kept this secret, but because she realized how little she truly understood about him. Clutching the photo tightly, she descended the attic stairs and confronted him in the kitchen. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What is this?" She held up the photograph, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to recognition, then finally to resignation. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Em, I can explain," he started, but she cut him off. "No, Dad, you need to explain. Who are you? Really?" Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was filled with hurt and bewilderment. John hesitated, torn between protecting her innocence and honoring her right to know the truth. Finally, he gestured toward the couch, inviting her to sit down. "All right," he said softly, "but promise me you'll listen until I'm done." Over the next hour, John recounted his past in painstaking detail. He told her about his career in the CIA, the missions he undertook, and the sacrifices he made along the way. He explained how losing her mother shattered him, driving him to leave behind the violent world he once inhabited. Most importantly, he revealed why he had chosen to intervene against the gang, not out of vengeance but out of love for her. As he spoke, tears welled up in Emily's eyes, not from fear but from awe. She had always admired her father, but hearing about the lengths he went to protect her gave her a newfound respect for him. When he finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Emily sat quietly, absorbing everything he had said. After what felt like an eternity, she reached out and took his hand. "I'm sorry I doubted you," she whispered, "and I'm sorry I didn't see how amazing you are." John smiled weakly, pulling her into a hug. "You have nothing to apologize for, Em. If anything, I should have told you sooner, but I wanted to keep you safe, from everything, including the truth." In the days that followed, Their relationship deepened in ways neither of them expected. Emily began asking questions about his past, eager to learn more about the man behind the legend. Though reluctant at first, John found solace in sharing stories he had kept bottled up for years. They laughed together over tales of misadventures abroad and marveled at the resilience required to survive such a demanding career. Through these conversations, Emily came to understand the complexity of her father's character, the balance between strength and vulnerability, courage and compassion. However, the revelation also raised new concerns. Now that Emily knew the truth, John worried about how it might affect her perception of the world and of him. Would she see him differently? Would she resent him for keeping such a monumental secret? To his relief, she handled the knowledge with maturity beyond her years, treating him with the same love and admiration she always had. Still, he couldn't ignore the lingering fear that his past might someday catch up with them again. That fear became all too real one evening when an unfamiliar car pulled up outside their house. John watched from the window as two men stepped out, their suits crisp and their expressions unreadable. His instincts screamed warning signals, reminding him of countless encounters with government agents during his CIA days. Before he could react, they approached the front door and knocked firmly. Opening it cautiously, John greeted them with forced politeness. "Can I help you?" One of the men flashed a badge. "Mr. Harper, we're here regarding recent developments related to Operation Nightfall. May we come in?" John's stomach churned as he ushered them inside, his mind racing with possibilities. What did they want? Had someone uncovered his involvement in the gang takedown? And most importantly, how much danger was Emily in now? John Harper's living room felt unnaturally quiet as he gestured for the two men to sit. Their polished suits and cold professionalism were a stark contrast to the cozy, mismatched furniture that filled his home. One of them introduced himself as Agent Mark Harris, while the other remained silent, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. John forced a polite smile, though his instincts screamed at him to remain vigilant. "What brings you here?" he asked calmly, keeping his tone neutral. Agent Harris leaned forward slightly, his voice measured but firm. "We're here about Operation Nightfall," he said, watching John's reaction closely. "Recent intelligence suggests there may be loose ends tied to your former assignments, specifically individuals who might still hold grudges." John's heart sank. He had always known that leaving the CIA didn't mean escaping its reach entirely, but he had hoped those days were far behind him. Now, sitting across from these agents, he realized the ghosts of his past weren't done haunting him, or his family. The agent continued, "You've been off-grid for years, Mr. Harper, which is admirable, but staying hidden doesn't erase the enemies you made during your service. Some of those people have resurfaced recently, and we believe they may pose a threat, not just to national security, but potentially to anyone connected to you." His words hit John like a punch to the gut. Enemies? Threats? The implications were clear. Emily wasn't safe. No matter how hard he tried to shield her, his past refused to let go. John's mind raced as he processed the information. "Are you saying someone knows where I am?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Agent Harris nodded grimly. "We intercepted communications suggesting that certain parties are aware of your location and your daughter's existence. We don't know their intentions yet, but given your history, it's best not to take chances." John clenched his fists beneath the table, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. How dare they bring danger to his doorstep again? After everything he had sacrificed to keep Emily safe, this was unacceptable. The second man finally spoke, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We're offering protection services for both you and your daughter. It would involve relocating temporarily until we can assess the situation further." John shook his head firmly. "No way. I'm not dragging Emily into hiding again. She deserves a normal life away from all this." The agents exchanged glances, clearly expecting resistance. Agent Harris sighed. "Mr. Harper, whether you like it or not, this isn't just about you anymore. If these people find you, they won't hesitate to use her against you. You know how this works." John wanted to argue, to tell them he could handle it on his own, but deep down, he knew they were right. His skills might have kept him alive in the past, but protecting Emily required more than stealth and strategy. It demanded resources and manpower he no longer had access to. Still, the thought of uprooting her life again filled him with guilt. She had already endured so much. How could he ask her to leave her friends, her school, her sense of stability? As if sensing his turmoil, Agent Harris softened his tone slightly. Look, we understand this is difficult, but we're not asking you to disappear forever, just long enough for us to neutralize the threat. Once it's over, you can return to your lives, with our assurance that no one will come after you again. John hesitated, weighing the options. Relocation meant surrendering control, putting his trust in others when he had spent years relying solely on himself. Yet doing nothing risked exposing Emily to unimaginable danger. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded reluctantly. Fine. But I have conditions. The agents listened intently as John laid out his terms. Emily wouldn't be told the full extent of the threat unless absolutely necessary, and they would stay within the country to minimize disruption. He also insisted on maintaining communication with Sarah Collins, whose involvement he trusted implicitly. To his surprise, the agents agreed without hesitation, likely relieved that he hadn't outright refused their offer. Before leaving, Agent Harris handed him a burner phone and a folder containing emergency protocols. We'll be in touch tomorrow morning to finalize arrangements, he said. Until then, stay alert. Once the agents were gone, John collapsed onto the couch, his mind reeling. He had hoped that dismantling the gang would mark the end of their troubles, but now another storm loomed on the horizon. This time, however, it wasn't just local thugs. It was international operatives with scores to settle. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time in years he felt truly powerless. Later that night, as Emily slept peacefully upstairs, John sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the burner phone on the table. Memories of his CIA days flooded back, the adrenaline-fueled missions, the moral compromises, the faces of those he had failed to save. He had left that life behind to give Emily a better future, yet here he was, preparing to drag her into the chaos once more. A wave of self-loathing washed over him, followed by determination. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight like hell to protect her future. The next morning, John broke the news to Emily gently, framing it as a temporary move due to work-related issues. Though skeptical, she agreed without protest, trusting her father implicitly. Over the course of the day, they packed essentials, leaving behind most of their belongings in hopes of returning soon. As they loaded the car, Emily glanced around, the neighborhood wistfully. "Do you think we'll ever come back here?" she asked quietly. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Of course we will, Em. This is just a little detour." Their new location turned out to be a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, provided by the agency for maximum security. While Emily explored the surrounding forest, finding solace in nature, John worked closely with Sarah and the agents to track down potential threats. Days turned into weeks as they pieced together fragments of evidence, uncovering a web of connections linking rogue operatives to Rico's gang. It appeared that Rico had been working under the radar for one of John's old adversaries, a man named Viktor Novikov, a ruthless arms dealer with a personal vendetta against him. Novikov's name sent chills down John's spine. He had crossed paths with the man years ago during a mission gone wrong, resulting in Novikov's imprisonment. Since then, rumors circulated about his escape and plans for revenge. Now, it seemed those rumors were true. Knowing this changed everything. If Novikov was involved, the stakes were higher than ever. John realized he couldn't rely solely on the agency's protection. He needed to take matters into his own hands. One evening, while Emily slept soundly in the adjacent room, John called, "Sarah." "I need your help," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I'm going after Novikov myself." Sarah protested immediately. "John, you can't do this alone. You're risking everything, including Emily's safety." He cut her off sharply. That's exactly why I have to do it. If I eliminate the source of the threat, she'll finally be free. I won't let her live her life looking over her shoulder because of me. Sarah hesitated before responding. All right, but you're not doing this without backup. Let me coordinate with the team. We'll create a distraction while you move in. Though reluctant to involve others, John knew she was right. Working together gave them the best chance of success. With Sarah's support secured, he began planning his final mission, one that would either end the nightmare once and for all or cost him everything he held dear. In the days leading up to the operation, John spent hours mentally preparing himself. He reviewed blueprints of Novikov's compound, memorized escape routes, and rehearsed every possible scenario. Each step brought him closer to confronting the man who threatened his family. Yet, even as he steeled himself for battle, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. Her laughter echoed in his mind, reminding him of what he was fighting for. For her sake, he vowed to succeed, even if it meant walking straight into the lion's den. The night of the operation arrived, cloaked in darkness and tension. John Harper stood at the edge of the dense forest surrounding Novikov's compound, his breath visible in the cold air. Dressed in black tactical gear and armed with tools from his duffel bag, he felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. This wasn't just another mission, it was personal. Every step he took brought him closer to ending the threat that had loomed over his family for too long. Somewhere behind him, Sarah Collins and her team were positioned strategically, ready to provide backup and create diversions when needed. But this part of the plan was all on him. Novikov's compound was a fortress, surrounded by high walls, topped with barbed wire and guarded by heavily armed men patrolling the perimeter. Surveillance cameras scanned every inch of the property, leaving no room for error. Yet John had spent years mastering the art of infiltration, and tonight those skills would be put to the ultimate test. Using thermal imaging goggles, he identified weak points in the security system, blind spots where guards rarely ventured, and areas where camera angles overlapped. With precision honed by experience, he disabled the nearest camera using an EMP device before slipping through the fence, undetected. Inside the compound, shadows danced across the ground as floodlights illuminated patches of the yard. John moved like a ghost, sticking close to the walls and timing his movements between guard rotations. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his mind remained razor-sharp, focused entirely on the task ahead. He reached a side entrance partially, obscured by crates, picking the lock within seconds. Once inside, he found himself in a dimly lit corridor lined with doors leading to various rooms. Voices echoed faintly from deeper within the building, accompanied by the metallic clink of weapons being prepared. John advanced cautiously, his senses on high alert. Peering into one of the rooms, he spotted a group of mercenaries gathered around a table, studying maps and discussing plans. Among them was Viktor Novikov, a tall, imposing figure whose sharp features radiated menace. Even from a distance, John could see the glint of hatred in Novikov's eyes, a reminder of their shared history. For a moment, memories of their last encounter flashed through John's mind, the chaos, the betrayal, the lives lost. Shaking off the distraction, he refocused. Revenge wasn't his goal. Protecting Emily was. As he continued navigating the compound, John planted small GPS trackers on key locations, ensuring law enforcement could trace Novikov's operations later. Then, following Sarah's carefully coordinated timeline, he triggered a series of explosions outside the compound, controlled blasts designed to draw attention away from the main building. The sound of detonations erupted in the distance, sending guards scrambling toward the commotion. Chaos spread quickly, giving John the opening he needed to move deeper into the facility. Reaching the control room, John hacked into the surveillance system, disabling additional cameras and locking down certain sections of the compound. As alarms blared and confusion reigned, he made his way to Novikov's private quarters. It was there that he found what he had been searching for: documents detailing Novikov's global network of illegal activities, including ties to Rico's gang and other criminal organizations. Capturing photos and downloading files onto a secure drive, John ensured the evidence would be enough to dismantle Novikov's empire once and for all. Just as he finished securing the data, a voice boomed behind him. "I wondered when you'd show up, Harper." Turning slowly, John came face to face with Novikov, who held a pistol aimed squarely at his chest. The man smirked, his confidence unwavering despite the chaos unfolding around them. "You always did have a flair for drama," Novikov sneered. "But this time your little tricks won't save you." For a split second, John considered surrendering, weighing the odds of survival against the likelihood of failure. But then he thought of Emily, her laughter, her dreams, her trust, and knew he couldn't give up. With lightning speed, he lunged forward, disarming Novikov before the man could pull the trigger. A brutal fight ensued, fists flying and bodies crashing against furniture. Though older and slower than he used to be, John relied on instinct and training to gain the upper hand. Finally, with one decisive blow, he knocked Novikov unconscious, binding him with zip ties. Breathing heavily, John contacted Sarah via his earpiece. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse but triumphant. Within minutes, SWAT teams stormed the compound, arresting Novikov and his men while securing the evidence John had gathered. As law enforcement took over, John slipped out unnoticed, retreating back into the shadows where he belonged. When he returned to the cabin hours later, Emily was waiting anxiously by the window. Seeing him walk through the door, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Dad, you're okay!" she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. John hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe they might finally be safe. Over the next few days, news broke about Novikov's arrest and the dismantling of his criminal empire. Reporters hailed it as a major victory against international crime, crediting anonymous sources and joint efforts by multiple agencies. John watched the coverage quietly, knowing the truth behind the headlines. Though tempted to take credit for his role, he chose to remain silent, letting the world believe whatever story suited them best. With the immediate threat neutralized, John and Emily began rebuilding their lives. They returned home to their cozy suburban neighborhood, resuming routines interrupted by danger. Neighbors welcomed them warmly, unaware of the battles fought and won in their absence. Emily threw herself back into school and soccer, her spirit unbroken despite everything she had endured. And John? He found peace in the simple joys of fatherhood, cooking breakfast together, cheering her on during games, and sharing quiet evenings, watching TV. Yet even as life settled into a rhythm of normalcy, John couldn't ignore the scars left behind. Not just physical ones, but emotional wounds that would take time to heal. He often sat alone in the garage, staring at the duffel bag tucked away in the corner. It represented a chapter of his life he hoped never to revisit, yet he knew it would always be a part of him. Still, he reminded himself daily why he had made the choices he did for Emily, because no matter how dark the shadows, a father's love could shine brighter than any weapon. One evening, as they sat together under the stars in their backyard, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," she began softly, "do you ever regret leaving the other life?" John smiled, reaching out to ruffle her hair affectionately. "Not for a single second, Em. I may have walked away from a lot of things, but I gained something far more important. You." Her eyes glistened with tears as she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. In that moment, John realized something profound. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing a better future. And though the road ahead might still hold challenges, he faced it with renewed hope, knowing he wasn't alone. Together, he and Emily had weathered storms that would have broken lesser bonds. Now, stronger than ever, they looked forward to brighter days filled with love, laughter, and the promise of tomorrow.